Hi, I'm Ken Fisher. Welcome to the 19th season of CityWide. My guest on this edition of CityWide is Lincoln Mitchell, national political correspondent for the New York Observer. Welcome to CityWide.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
You think of national correspondents, it's people who were writing for their high school newspaper, went to journalism school, and never looked back. Your path was somewhat more circuitous. Political consultant, international consultant, professor. How did you get to where you are?
Well, I like writing, and I like writing about politics. And for years, when I was an academic at Columbia, my scholarly work was about foreign policy, about the former Soviet Union, but I was writing regularly on domestic politics and on baseball at the Huffington Post. Mostly, I think, really because I just had this need to write this stuff. So after a while of years of doing that, I had a discussion with the Observer, and they said, you know, why don't you come work for us, which is, frankly, a much better place for me to be. I enjoy working there, and it's nice to get paid. So that's how I ended up at the Observer.
You have written a couple of books.
Yes.
What are those about?
My first book is about the Rose Revolution in Georgia, and my second book is on the color revolutions in the former Soviet Union, and my third book, which will be out with luck later this year, is on U.S. democracy promotion policy. But
you started out, at least in the New York scene, as a political consultant doing local campaigns.
Yes, I started out running local campaigns, and after several years of doing that, decided it was time for a career change, and I went to Georgia in the former Soviet Union, worked there for an organization called the National Democratic Institute for a few years, and then decided I wanted to pivot when I got back from there back to academia. My Ph.D. is in political science, and I've been around, American campaigns. I mean, my first mayoral race was passing out literature for George Moscone in San Francisco, so it goes back a while.
Okay, so you're the national correspondent for the New York Observer. Well, what do you observe about the national scene?
Well, what I'm observing about the national scene is a couple of things. I think that we're getting into what will be an unusual but still kind of fun presidential election season. On the one hand, you have the Democratic non-primary, where, as far as I observe, Hillary Clinton will be the nominee, barring something very, very dramatic, or barring a decision on her part that she doesn't want to run, but I think it's very, very likely that she will run, and if she does, she'll essentially be uncontested. And then we're having, in 2012, we had this fantastic reality show called the Republican Primary Season. Little different this year because in 2012, the central truth was that it was an uncontested primary. Nobody other than Mitt Romney made a serious effort to win that nomination, but the media kept covering it differently. I think this year it may be different. Jeb Bush is clearly the front runner, but there is reason to think that some of these other candidates can actually put together serious campaigns, making it a little more competitive.
Well, let me parse that into two pieces. First of all, the Republican field is unusually large. I count 13, 14 candidates, maybe more. But it seems to be a higher percentage of serious people than it was in 2012.
That's exactly right. That's why it could be a real campaign, right? I mean, people like Marco Rubio, Scott Walker, even Ted Cruz are poised to be much more strong and serious candidates than, a former speaker who left in semi-disgrace or a former senator who's been floating around just taking weird right-wing positions on social issues. And then you have Rand Paul, who I don't think is going to win the nomination, but can count on a certain amount of support from his faction within the party, and Jeb Bush, who is the front runner, but will probably have a tougher road than Romney did in 2012.
Well, if you're anybody other than Jeb Bush, how do you break through the clutter? How do you become a contender? I mean, Rick Santorum last time sort of all of a sudden became the flavor of the week and came up short in capitalizing it, but he was the breakout candidate. How do you become a breakout candidate in this field?
Santorum in 2012 was the last breakout candidate because Michelle Bachmann at one point was the breakout candidate, Herman Cain. It was kind of a musical chairs for the breakout
But the more they
candidate.
were exposed, the worse they did.
This, campaigns, the media tends to cover campaigns by about positioning, ideology, who's charismatic, who gives a great speech. Campaigns are about working, organization, and raising money. So the candidate, so you have, as I see the Republican field shaping up, you have Jeb Bush, who's the front runner. You have Rand Paul, who is essentially running in a more finite field among the libertarian wing of the party, who is an intriguing candidate, but probably not going to be the nominee. And he has both a floor, but also a ceiling for his support. Then you have kind of everyone else. Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Scott Walker, Bobby Jindal, Mike Huckabee, and of those, if you're one of those guys, the first thing you have to do is break out from everybody else in that group. Don't worry about Jeb Bush. Be the one of those guys that's raised the most money, for example. A lot of this has to do about money. Giving a great speech at CPAC is nice, but unless you can cash in on that and begin to build an organization, because really what you have to do at this point is position yourself as a more right-wing alternative to Jeb Bush among the social conservative wing of the party, and also be ready to do something if Bush falters.
What about Carly? I'm drawing a blank on her last
Carly
name.
Fiorina from California?
From California. She would appear to be an attractive candidate if for no other reason than she has that network of high net worth donors that she can call on. In fact, she may even be able to self-fund part of the campaign.
Yeah, my sense on Carly Fiorina is that there is a long tradition, particularly in the Republican Party, of the kind of business person as savior. Lee Iacocca's name was bandied around. Peter Ueberroth's name was bandied around.
Mitt Romney.
Mitt Romney, but Mitt Romney, actually, in fairness, was a chief executive of his state. Those make for great kind of campaign kibitzing. It's very hard to turn that into a winning campaign. So my sense right now is that Fiorina is in that mix over here. She's obviously coming at it from a different place because she's a woman, because she's from California, because she has, I think when you compare her to Rubio and Cruz and those people, a very different set of experiences. Right now, I don't see that as where the Republican primary vote is coming from, because the Republican primary voter right now who's saying, I want the one with business experience, they're going to go with Jeb Bush.
Well, why is Jeb Bush the front runner? He is from a well-known family. He's never run nationally before. His politics are a mix of very conservative and a few areas where he's a little bit less conservative, but I would suspect that his profile really isn't that different from Chris Christie's ideologically.
Perhaps not. I might think he's a little more conservative than Chris Christie ideologically. I was talking to a Republican guy I speak to a lot about what's going on inside the Republican Party, and what he told me over Friday via email was, he said, the people in the party that want to see a winner, that want to win, are going with the Bush. The sense is within the Republican Party that the Bushes know how to win. Now, it sounds like a cliche. Let's maybe dig into that a little bit. Jeb Bush has handled this very well. He got in and he immediately got out in front of the money. That's hugely important here. And now you have, imagine that you are a Republican donor in pick whatever state you want, right? And, you got to visit the White House, or you got to have your child do an intern here, or you got to be an ambassador somewhere, or you've got a little regulation that the president made sure happened for your way. And now George W. Bush calls you up, and you say, well, I really like Ted Cruz. And he's the former president of the United States, likely the brother of the next president, the way things are looking now, says, well, are you really going to go against me for Ted Cruz, who's at 4th place in the polls? Are you sure you want to do that? You multiply that by 100 times, and by more than just George W. Bush making those calls, and that builds a very strong organization for Jeb Bush, and the Bushes are smart enough to put it together. They did that once before. That's how George W. Bush, from a similar profile, made his way to the presidency in 2000. They've been through this move.
But George W. Bush seemed to stand for more. He projected what the country was looking for at that time. Some stability outside of Washington, where, look, Lincoln, you're very much focused on the organizational side of it, the money, because it's very difficult to break through to voters, and particularly in so many different states. But I think there's an anger out there on voters that's driving both the left and the right. It's a backlash against the elites, and doesn't Bush kind of reflect what the corporate elite that Americans across the ideological spectrum are fed up with?
Yes, and Bush is clearly not the place for angry voters to go. I think the problem facing the kind of angry voter narrative right now is that some of those people go with Rand Paul. So they're effectively taken out of the ballgame, right? He gets 18% here, maybe breaks through to 31% there, but he's not winning any states. But he's taking a huge chunk of those angry voters. The rest of those angry voters are largely dissipated among the Bobby Jindals, the Ben Carsons, the Mike Huckabees. If there was one of those people, instead of 12 of them, I think you'd have a real race. If early on, let's just say Scott Walker knocks out the rest of that field, and it's Walker, Bush, and Paul, even if Bush continues to have the fundraising advantage, then you have a real race. But until that happens, that anger is too widely dissipated in the Republican Party. Now, in the general election, clearly, I think you could have a general election where Jeb Bush against Hillary Clinton, where there's going to be an lack of enthusiasm on both sides, which will be made up through two ways. One, again, you spend the money to generate the enthusiasm, and two, scaring people about the other side.
Do you think that Hillary can engender enthusiasm as the first gender candidate, as the first serious woman candidate, if she's the nominee?
Well, Hillary Clinton, there are some voters for whom Hillary Clinton will create great enthusiasm. And that could be, we shouldn't understate that, because the statistic that I like to give to understand why Hillary Clinton is such a formidable general election candidate, because I think there's a narrative out there that says, well, she's going to walk to the nomination, but, she's not a great politician. She can't win in a general election. She's vulnerable. She hasn't. But the thing is, among white, straight women who aren't Jewish, 2/3 of them voted for Mitt Romney against Barack Obama. If Hillary Clinton, whose base should be white women, who resonates very well, particularly with white women over 40, if she can get that up to 40 to 42, 43%, which I don't think is a huge leap for Hillary Clinton, and that does come from enthusiasm about her personally and what she represents and how people relate to her, that she can walk, that'll get her the presidency of the United States.
Doesn't she also have to make up an enthusiasm gap among black voters compared to Barack Obama?
Yes, she will. But to me, that is doable. Will she get the exact level of black turnout that Barack Obama got in 2008? I don't think anybody's going to get that national level for a while. But can she get in the key states where she needs to? Can they put enough money on the ground? Can they generate enough enthusiasm? Can they bring in people to campaign for her? Absolutely. I would also point out, related to Hillary Clinton, that although there is, particularly among their supporters, tension between the Obama people and the Clinton people, right now their fates are really intertwined. Barack Obama, two-term president, if he leaves office and the Republicans come in and begin to repeal everything he did, he's not going to feel that he was a success, and history won't treat him that way. If, however, he brings, after he comes in, his former Secretary of State wins, on domestic policy doesn't really change much, on foreign policy will be more conservative, but, such is life. That shows that his presidency was a success. Similarly, Hillary Clinton, although I think has tried to distance herself from Obama, the more popular Obama gets in the last 2 years of his presidency, the easier her road to the White House is. So their fates are intertwined. It's very easy for me to imagine a situation where in a key state with African-American voters, let's say Wisconsin in 2016, that both Bill Clinton and Barack Obama are aggressively campaigning for Hillary Clinton. That might move some voters.
You get the sense, and we went through this in the race where she did lose to Obama, that she keeps stepping in mud, maybe other things, and while it doesn't bring her to her knees, there's this sort of faint aroma that seems to follow her wherever she goes. And most recently, we've seen sort of a constant stream of attacks chipping away at her. She takes foreign money through the Clinton Foundation. Not only that, but she takes it from repressive states, particularly against women. This whole flap about her using a private email has got people, even who like her and respect her, scratching her head and saying, I know that, how come she didn't get viruses, or, the KGB wasn't tapping her emails. It's like they just seem sometimes to make serious missteps.
Well, thank you for that lovely image. But look, these are the Clintons being the Clintons. And this, Hillary Clinton has now been in public life for a quarter of a century, really. And this is who she is. First of all, she's not a gifted, natural candidate on the stump. We know that about her from 2008. We know that about her. And that's showing now. Secondly, she and her husband in their public lives have frequently danced to the edge of what is legal, danced to the edge of what is ethical, and left that to the interpretation of the courts, of the people, of the media, of the voters. To me, that's what you get with Hillary Clinton. Now, if I were Hillary Clinton running for president, I would also say what you also get with Hillary Clinton is experience, is somebody who's always going to be the smartest and most prepared person in the room, who's someone who's very hardworking and is going to have your back, just like Bill Clinton did. That's a trade-off the voters are going to have to figure out. You can't get away from that if you're Hillary Clinton. Because even if this email thing had never happened, even if the Clinton Foundation thing had never happened, there's still 20 years of the Clintons being the Clintons that the Republicans are going to throw it at her. Now, it doesn't mean she should keep doing it, but it is just part of the package of Hillary Clinton. But there are positives also.
We're going to talk about what the candidate should be talking about when CityWide continues right after this. Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with Lincoln Mitchell, national political correspondent for the New York Observer. Lincoln, before the break, we were talking about, to some extent, the mechanics of running the presidential campaign for the Democrats, for the Republicans. I want to ask you about the messaging of the campaign. And let's start with the domestic economy, right? It's the economy stupid, the great slogan of James Carville in the first Clinton race. So in this election, is it the economy, and what should Republicans and Democrats be saying about it?
Well, to some extent, it's always the economy, right? The extent to which that blots out all other issues varies from race to race. This, to me, is an interesting, will play out in a very interesting way, because it's now 2016. You can no longer blame the problems on the economy on the Bush administration, for example. Moreover, Hillary Clinton, as a Democratic nominee, doesn't want to get too deep into that, because, of course, some of that responsibility is also with the Clinton years, which we've been taught from Bill and Hillary Clinton for the last decade to view one way, and the truth is a little more complicated. But you have these battery of economic-related issues. Jobs are coming back. The data says one thing. People are feeling something different. People are thinking about inequality in ways that they really haven't thought about in this country, certainly since I've been paying attention to politics for 30 or 40 years. And there is this fear that is out there and playing itself out in different ways. So, for example, there's a growing awareness of, does it really help to saddle every generation of young people with, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loans? That's an economic issue. Healthcare is an economic issue. The economic issues are going to be front and center, but they're going to be front and center in different ways with different foci than in the past.
I think one of the things that's changed in politics over the last 15, 20 years, in the 90s, when the Soviet Union had collapsed, there didn't seem to be any serious economic or political challengers to the United States around the world. Russia was in disarray. China was just starting to come out of its isolation. And American foreign policy, of course, was influenced by September 11th and the Iraq wars, but it seemed kind of remote from people's everyday lives. Now we have a very ambitious Putin in Russia. We have a China that is projecting its power throughout Asia and Africa. We have Iran, which is a country of 65 million people that is commanding the attention of the United States. And then we've got some of these terrorist groups that have gone from blowing up supermarkets to capturing entire cities. So is foreign policy now going to be a test for presidential candidates on both sides in a way that it wasn't the last couple of elections?
Well, it will be, particularly on the Republican side, because on the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton can certainly speak intelligently about foreign policy. And whether or not you agree with her is a different story, but she clearly understands the issues. I think Herman Cain, Becky stand, that kind of thing, is not going to play at all. It didn't play that well in 2012. It's really not going to play in 2016. Out of this cast of Republican characters, those that cannot speak articulately about foreign policy, the Chris Christie answer, well, Putin wouldn't have invaded Ukraine if I were in charge. Really? Because he invaded Georgia when George W. Bush was in charge.
Or
right?
Scott Walker saying, I could face down 100,000 Union members.
Right. That doesn't cut it anymore. So the Republicans are going to have to be able to pass a threshold among their voters in the primary to show, hey, I can speak intelligently about foreign policy. I think Jeb Bush can probably get himself to that point. Once you get to, and I think some of the others can too. Now, Rand Paul has a very different foreign policy vision than the rest of the Republican Party. But again, I don't think he's going to be the nominee. Once you get to the general election, it's very interesting, because what you will find, I think, is that Hillary Clinton is not that far off. If you put Obama here, the kind of Jeb Bush and the Republicans here, Hillary Clinton is closer to here than she is to Obama. So foreign policy will be important in that the leadership has to be able to speak intelligently about it. The candidates have to be able to speak intelligently about it. It will be important for Hillary Clinton because people will look at her record at the State Department and try to tag her with what the Republicans will call the failures of the Obama administration.
And voting for the Iraq War.
And voting for the Iraq War, although that is now so long ago. I don't know the voter that doesn't vote for her because of that. In a primary, if she had a real primary, yes, that could come back again, but it's not.
So let's take an issue that has political ramifications, but where I don't think that the policy choices have been clearly articulated, and that's the United States' relations with Iran and whether or not Obama should be pursuing the treaty that he says will be extremely reasonable for Iran. This is, you're a Republican candidate and you think Obama is being too soft on Iran. What is your alternative? Is it war? And the same token, you're a Democratic candidate, and you are supporting the president's effort to hold the Iranians to a nuclear program that can't create a bomb in less than a year. But that doesn't seem to sit well with a lot of people who think that they just can't be trusted. So I don't know what people should be saying either on the merits or to move voters.
Well, what I think you have to say if you're a Republican right now is that this is weakness, this is Obama giving in, this is Obama throwing our longtime ally Israel under the bus. You say all those things. Once you get to be president, you probably have to do what Obama's doing if you really do care about our longtime important ally Israel. And I think for Hillary Clinton, she will be able to thread that need a little bit better because she will say we need to be negotiating. She should say, we need to be negotiating. We need to be making more demands, not fewer demands on Iran. But we can't not have dialogue. The actual policy here is of course, that's debatable and that's much more complicated. But on a lot of these issues, including Ukraine, including ISIS, the menu of things you can say when you're in the Senate or running for president is quite large. The menu of things you can do when you're president, and no one learned this more than Barack Obama in the last few years, is quite small.
Because you raise expectations and then you can't deliver.
Right, not that many,
and then you stop raising expectations and you're accused of being weak.
Or someone who really knows what they're doing says, if you follow that path, this is what might happen.
Right.
And then you have to live with that.
So there's another player on the national stage, and that's John Boehner, the Republican Speaker of the House of Representatives, using every tool available to him to trip up the Obama administration and to set traps for Hillary Clinton. Most recently by having the head of the government of Israel come and speak in opposition to the president's policies at the House of Representatives. Just from a political point of view, put aside the effect on the negotiations or what's happening behind the scenes, but from a political point of view, masterstroke on his part, split the Jewish community away from the Democratic Party?
On Boehner's part or on Netanyahu's
On Boehner's part.
Well, Boehner clearly wants to have a Likud partner in Israel running the show over there. So I think he was trying to help Netanyahu, trying to take a shot at Obama. This probably in the long run backfired on Boehner. I don't know that it backfired on Netanyahu. We'll see that sooner. But it showed that Boehner, the constant mantra of the Republicans about Democrats is that, they don't do what's good for the country. They don't understand that they're just all about the politics. This was so transparently all about the politics. And, this notion of splitting the Jewish vote, splitting Jewish support, more Jews voted for Obama than for Netanyahu, right? I mean, in the last time each of them stood for elections. So I think Obama knows he's fine there. I think his polling data shows that he's fine there. And it is, the substance of this is very troubling. I think that if you are somebody who is really concerned about the security of Israel, which I feel that way, and concerned about what would happen if Iran got a nuclear weapon, I would want as much dialogue as possible between the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of the United States, regardless of who sits in those seats. And I want U.S. support for Israel to be as bipartisan as possible. And anyone who threatens that bipartisan support for Israel, whether so they can win the next election in Israel or that whether they can get a couple steps ahead on the President of the United States, is not doing the best thing for Israel.
You have worked internationally, and most particularly in former Soviet Union countries. You lived in the Republic of Georgia. You were part of the Rose Revolution in Georgia, for those who don't know what that is. Dissident group storming the Parliament building, holding armful of flowers so that they couldn't be accused of carrying weapons. Is the former Soviet Union, is Russia the biggest threat to the United States? Should we be more focused on Putin or on China or on Iran? What is the priority and what is Putin up to?
Russia is not the biggest threat to the United States. It's very certainly a threat to Ukraine, to Georgia, potentially to Moldova, to we'll see. I mean, it's not clear what Putin is up to, except that we know Putin, it's not clear what his end game is. Couple things to keep in mind, right? Clearly, he has demonstrated that the Western narrative, and I'm saying this in gentle terms, the Western narrative that the end of the Soviet Union was a triumph for human freedom, and that all of these other countries should be independent sovereign states, free to join NATO, free to be part of the West, which is what we believe in the United States. Putin clearly does not believe that, and disagrees with that very strongly, and has demonstrated a willingness to use force to stop those things from happening, right? So that's part of the reality. We also know that Putin has sent troops into a powerful and large Ukraine rather than a small and weak Lithuania, Estonia, or Latvia, because the former is not a member of NATO and the latter is. So one of the things we've heard in the kind of ether here about this is Putin's invasion, incursion, whatever you want to call it, into Ukraine is evidence that NATO is weak. But his fear of going into NATO countries means that NATO still does stand for something. That's frankly cold comfort if you're sitting in Tbilisi or Kiev, but it is something to think about.
So if you have, I mean, are we in a world now where Iran is projecting its power into multiple states, into Iraq, into Syria? Sort of, they have filled the void that, in part, not just the collapse of the Hussein's government, but also Egypt. Then you've got China asserting itself there, Russia asserting itself, the United States still predominant where it is, and the only parts of the world that are up for grabs are basically the breadbaskets and the mineral deposits in South America and Africa. Is that the new world order for the 21st century?
Well, I would also add you have Saudi Arabia, which is also a competitor, a very serious competitor with Iran in the Middle East, and you have the European Union. It is a more multipolar world. It is important to keep in mind the United States still is the richest and most powerful of those poles, and that the United States military is still much stronger than any other military. It's not so strong that we can kind of snap our fingers and get Putin out of Ukraine, because if we could, I'm sure we'd be very happy to do that. But it is still the strongest. It is definitely a world where countries can now look. In 1995, if you were a poor country, you really had only one place to look, which was towards the U.S. and our European allies. Now, if you're Bahrain, Saudi Arabia is going to be your patron forever. If you set up some Shia mini-states somewhere, Iran can be your patron. Russia would be very happy to set up puppet governments in Tbilisi and Kiev and be the patron for those countries. They're doing that in Abkhazia. They've done that in South Ossetia. They've certainly done that in Crimea through invasion. So we are looking at a multipolar world where the U.S. cannot, I think, get what it wants absolutely everywhere. We have a global reach, but we can't get the outcome we want globally. And that's a very difficult situation for the United States for a number of reasons. But one of those reasons, or one set of those reasons, is that the foreign policy establishment of the United States still believes that every problem is a problem that we can solve. If I walk outside of this building and I can't find the B train to go back uptown, I could, but theoretically if I couldn't, and I ran into John McCain and I said, where the B train is, John McCain would suggest a no-fly zone and some strategic strikes, right? Because for the foreign policy establishment, that's the answer to everything, some kind of U.S. action. It's not quite that world anymore. And that is at the very, very heart of this question of what to do in Ukraine. There's no easy answer, right? We did the sanctions. The sanctions helped, but not enough. If we send defensive weapons to Ukraine, the real fear that the war gets escalated. And the thought, I had a conversation with the former defense minister of one of these former Soviet countries. He was a sitting defense minister at the time, and he was telling me about his meetings in Washington. And I said to him, next time you're meeting with all those senators pledging their support, this is a non-NATO country, ask them how many of them want to write a letter to a mother in their district telling them that their son died fighting in your country. And the answer is none of them. And that's still part of the reality, too.
My thanks to Lincoln Mitchell, national political correspondent for the New York Observer. I'm Ken Fisher. Thanks for joining us on this edition of CityWide. Send your comments and suggestions to CityWide at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Or contact us at cuny.tv.